And joining us now with more, John Sitilides, geopolitical strategist with Trilogy Advisors and senior fellow for global risks at the Center for the National Interest. John, thank you so much for joining us. Always great to have you. Do you think these sanctions will get Iran to finally give in?
Well, there are three larger concerns that I have here, Tiffany. These involve speed, scope, and scale. Speed, in terms of the fact that Treasury Secretary Bessent made very clear these sanctions are not going to be imposed immediately. They're being communicated by President Trump, by Secretary Bessent, and I presume other top officials. And we're talking here about dozens, scores, over 100 countries that are doing business one way or the other with Iran. So this will take time to play out, to be implemented. In terms of scope, keep in mind that about 40 to 50% of the Iranian economy is off the books, controlled by the IRGC, black market involving smuggling, shadow networks, religious foundations, and charities. We can't confirm right now that the Treasury Department really has a handle on every single one of these trade and financial linkages. Those are the two major concerns. And then, of course, going back to the point you just raised about China and frankly other countries, when we talk about the scale of these sanctions. Now, I understand why Treasury Secretary Bessent did not single out China by name or respond to a reporter who brought it up. They're going to do this very smartly and discreetly, I presume. But we're talking here about seven land neighbors of Iran. So you may have open land borders there, smuggling taking place. You have Russia across the Caspian Sea. And then, of course, not only China in preparation for the major summit meeting with President Trump next month, but also important countries like India and many European countries that have continued to do business with Iran. So the scale of these sanctions is also going to be quite overwhelming. And this is where I think there are some rightful concerns right now about how effective Operation Economic Outcast will ultimately be.
And digging into that, Secretary Bessent said today we've begun calling up countries with specific requests. What are the top three countries that can make the biggest difference?
Well, China, first of all, is the country I think that we expect the most of in terms of purchasing Iranian oil. The Biden administration allowed China to continue to evade American and international sanctions and to enrich the Iranian economy, which, of course, the IRGC used not to build up infrastructure or to provide a better economy for the extremely poor Iranian people, thanks to poor governance, but to build up the nuclear weapons program and thousands upon thousands of ballistic missiles. So China, I think, is the primary issue here. But there are also major countries in the immediate region. Pakistan, one of them, Turkey, Qatar, which is not a land neighbor, but just across the Persian Gulf, India, which also had previously made large purchases of Iranian hydrocarbons before the war began in February. But I think these are going to be the immediate concerns. And keep in mind, Pakistan and Qatar presumed to be major intermediaries between President Trump's team and the IRGC. And Turkey is a major NATO ally, which often operates in very underhanded ways to promote its aspirations to be a leader in the Muslim world. So we don't know that we have very reliable partners in the immediate vicinity to help us impose the kinds of sanctions if they're going to be as airtight as Secretary Bessent proclaims.
And speaking of sanctions, it sounds like we are expecting to have to impose secondary sanctions and maybe as early as this week. This is what the secretary
Mhm.
said today. Let's take a listen.
And I want to emphasize that we are spreading out across the world as we speak, that you will see a wave of sanctions when you leave this meeting today, and you should expect that cadence to continue. And I would expect that you will see a major announcement of a financial institution being sanctioned by the end of this week.
And John, how are you reading this?
Well, it's very difficult at this point to ascertain who exactly or which exactly that financial institution might be. But I don't believe it will be anything involving China at this point. I think, again, President Trump has placed major stakes on a successful meeting with President Xi when he comes to Washington next month. I can't imagine there's any Russian institution that is that healthy right now, given 4.5 years of pronounced American and EU sanctions. It could be a major European institution or maybe one of the Middle Eastern neighbors of Iran. I would look to those two regions, but not to China or Russia.
And we are also expanding sanctions on Iran to cover five new sectors: digital assets, technology, gold, aviation, and shipping. Now, Treasury also wrote out some 60 sanctions today targeting its oil, cyber, and weapons networks, including on Iranian, Malaysian, Chinese, Ukrainian, and UAE based entities. How big of a hit will Iran take from all of this?
Well, of course, the intention is to have as significant and as pronounced a hit as possible if we believe Secretary Bessent, who I think has really been given tremendous free rein by President Trump. I mean, I think this is Bessent's project right now to bring about what he calls the economic asphyxiation of the IRGC and of the regime. And as he said last weekend in anticipation of today's announcement, the goal is no longer just to bring about an end to Iran's nuclear weapons program, its regime collapse. And to do that, you really need to bring about such dire conditions inside the country, hyperinflation of 50% a month or more, repeatedly, month after month after month, hopefully not really just to drive the Iranian people to the streets because they face massacres as they did back in January. But I think the goal here really is to persuade the professional army, the Artesh, to potentially lead a coup against the IRGC. But these are going to be very difficult sanctions, I think, to impose with any airtight aspect to them because many of these countries have their own interests. They don't have ironclad control over all of their land routes and trading activities with a country like Iran, or perhaps through third countries that are willing to risk American sanctions. And look, the world is replete with criminal organizations whose modus vivendi is bypassing these types of legal sanctions. So I think this is going to be a much taller order than Secretary Bessent has at least led us to believe. I hope I'm wrong, but I think this could take many, many months to play out. And I think there'll be many loopholes and many opportunities for criminal organizations and, frankly, rogue governments to try to exploit.
And on that note, what do you expect to see from Iran in terms of retaliation?
Well, that's a very important element of concern here, also, Tiffany. One, first of all, we know that Iran is very willing to attack its neighbors. And I think we're probably in very close consultation with many of the Gulf Arab countries who are concerned about their energy infrastructure. The Iranian leaders of the IRGC made very clear that any country that they perceive to be joining the US in this sanctions regime will be considered an enemy of Iran. Does that mean they'll stop at simply attacking hydrocarbon facilities, refineries, going after shipping more intensively? Will they actually attack, say, desalination plants, maybe in Saudi Arabia, if Saudi Arabia is considered a partner with the United States? And then there's also the demonstrated capabilities in cyber attacks. They've attacked grids in the United Kingdom, here in the United States. They have a very, very proficient cyber offensive team or teams in Iran. And I think there's concern about the infrastructure grids in countries around the world, especially in the advanced industrial world in Western Europe and probably parts of the United States.
And John, we saw Iran trying to shore up alliances last week with President Trump's announcement of economic D-Day and the usual vows of retaliation today. Now, a lot of Gulf nations had come forward to play mediator when it seemed like a deal could be reached with Iran, and Iran violated the last one almost immediately. Now, Trump now says he doesn't trust Iran to make a good deal. Do you think its neighbors will continue to try to work with it at the risk of, like Bessent said, standing against the United States?
My concern, Tiffany, is that neighbors will state that they are trying to bring about the best deal. And we've seen this already in Pakistan, in Qatar, and in Turkey, when these countries have their own ulterior motives. Qatar, of course, shares this enormous gas field beneath the Persian Gulf with Iran, and it wants to be able to preserve this since they're using up about 70% of that gas field for their profits compared to 30% for Iran. Pakistan is an ally of communist China. Maybe besides North Korea, China's best ally in the world is Pakistan. And remember, this is the country that harbored Osama bin Laden until SEAL Team 6 went in and took him out back around 15 years or so ago. And Turkey has been conducting very independent foreign policies, very hostile to American and NATO interests in the Middle East, in Northern Africa, in the Horn of Africa, very independent on many fronts. And so I think the issue for President Trump is going to be who can actually be trusted to work with the United States to help us achieve our goals? Or are they simply exploiting President Trump's desire to bring about an end to the war, victoriously, we hope, in order to attain their own ambitions?
A lot at stake for sure. John Sitilides, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.